Hello, everyone. We'll start in just a couple more minutes. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started here. It is 4 o'clock on Thursday. This meeting is being recorded and is live on Facebook. And so right now there are 118 people in the Zoom meeting and about another 85 on Facebook Live right now. This meeting will be posted on YouTube and will be kept on Facebook afterwards for people to watch. There will be the Q&A function available during this meeting and afterwards. I expect there will be a lot of questions today, and we'll do our best to get to those, but there will be a survey that we're going to put out at the end of this meeting that will provide an opportunity for feedback and for community members to ask questions. And I want to stress that this is a draft of a plan that we're working towards having finalized on July 30th for us to then begin preparations to start our school year. So today I'm going to walk through the plan that we as an administrative team have put together on behalf of this task force and with all of the feedback and input we've gathered thus far. So this is a starting point today. The ending point will be at the end of July, and then we're going to keep refining and making plans and preparations for the start of our school year on August 31st. So for those of you who are watching this meeting live or sometime in the future, know that just because we talk about something today doesn't mean it's going to be our final plan. And this is part of an iterative process to determine what the best pathway is for our community. The reason we're doing this planning this way is this plan to reopen our schools has to be something that our community feels that they are a part of and feel comfortable with. There is an inordinate amount of guidance out there for schools on how to reopen. There is a mind-numbing amount of data and resources and papers and articles, and we've been through a lot of that. But we have to take all of that and put it into practice in our own local community. And so what we're presenting today is our first stab at putting together a plan that we think will work for our community and support our students in the process. And so as I go through this, as your questions are raised, feel free to throw those into the Q&A function at the bottom here, or save them and send them to us in the survey that we have at the very end. I'm going to go over the timeline now, and then I'll go over it again at the end. The plan is for today for this task force to review this plan for the first time. No one on this task force has had the opportunity to review this plan. It exists in two formats. There's this PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to go through, and then there's a more lengthy and more detailed document that has a lot more details associated with it that will be provided both to the community and the task force at the end of my presentation. What my hope is that by next week, The members of this task force will have the opportunity to reflect on this plan and provide feedback next Thursday. And then between next Thursday and the 23rd, for all of the subgroups to meet and to go through the plan in detail with each of the subgroups and gather all of their feedback, so that on July 30th, we can attempt to finalize and refine the plan and have it be a finished product that can then move forward. I am going to be asking the SAU board to meet on August 10th because I believe there are some policy and resource issues that need to be discussed at the board level in order to be prepared for the start of our school year. So the timeline really is for this task force from now through July 30th to go through and refine this plan. And then that gives all of our school people about a month to get ready for that first day of school. And it is going to be an action-packed couple of months getting us ready for that. So with all of that said, I'd like to dive right in. And I want to start by saying that our goal as a school system is on the academic side of things. And so our objective for this coming year is very simple. We need to make sure that every student safely achieves a year of academic growth with a target of around Memorial Day to get to that point. That does not mean a year of standards. That does not mean anything more than we want to make sure that all of our students have a full year's worth of school at least this coming school year safely. And that's our objective, and we need to keep coming back to that because that can help us simplify when we think about our plans. So some foundations that I've pulled together and are basing this plan off of, I want to go through and unpack in some detail, and I'm going to come back to a lot of these in a little bit as well. The first is, and this might be hard for some people to hear, but it's my best judgment that it's likely that this school year and perhaps others after it are likely to be disrupted. Disrupted is a technical term for when a typical school year is not typical. Last school year was disrupted when we all went to remote learning in March. The point is nobody knows for sure how this school year is going to go, but it's very likely to be a school year that has challenge in it. And we can't count on a vaccine coming that is a panacea. We can't count on next school year not having similar challenges. And so our planning process has to be hopeful for the best case scenarios, but to be proactive about preparing for what could be a lengthy process. That leads into the second foundation, which is this is a completely unpredictable situation, and it's unpredictable in terms of the science and also public perception and individual comfort levels around this situation. And I expect there to be things that adjust. I expect that conditions will change. I expect that families will make different decisions during the course of the school year. And I expect that our response will have to be adaptable and dynamic during this coming school year. I do believe that we have to rely upon our federal, state, and local officials to assist us in determining safety protocols. And what I mean by that is we have access to data, but there needs to be some onus on those above us as well to help us determine what our safety protocols ought to be. And we have to implement those and make good decisions at the local level, but there's some responsibility above us for a lot of those protocols. Remote learning has got to be rigorous. We have learned this past spring a lot about remote learning, and we know that it is not an exact replica for what happens in a classroom and what happens in school. We may have had different opinions about that before last spring, but we've all grown and understood that. But as we move forward, we've got to make our remote learning system, when in use, has got to be rigorous and be as close to being the same as the in-person experience as it possibly can be. And so we've got to adjust what we did this past spring. What I'm trying to say is that our plan this past spring was great. We were in crisis mode and we adjusted and adapted, but we've got to step up our game moving forward for the remote piece of our learning strategy to be successful for us. And that means our learning outcomes have to remain intact. We have to still strive to meet the expectations that we have for our students. This past spring, we took a step back in terms of our academic expectations. That was the right thing to do. Our country and our community was in a crisis. But moving forward, if we expect that this entire school year, maybe others after it, may be affected by this crisis, we have to be prepared to have to keep our standards high and to keep them intact. Teachers can't do more than one thing at a time. So there are some folks that believe that a teacher can be in a classroom with a camera and have students in front of them and also other students at home at the same time. And I think that's a fool's errand, and that we've got to admit to ourselves that our expectations for our teachers need to be realistic and grounded in some sort of realism. So it's a foundational belief that I have that teachers should be expected to use one modality at a time. And then finally, each of us have to be in this together. We have to see this as a community crisis that we're all responding to, and we are all reacting to, and we all have a role in being successful, a role in our school system being successful this coming year. And so with that in mind, what that means is we don't know what this year is going to bring, but we all know that we're going to be challenged and that we all are going to have to rely on one another, support one another, and contribute to our continued success as a school system. So those are our foundational beliefs that lead into what are really going to be our key strategies for this coming year. And that starts with each member of our school community. We're going to strive for people to be able to make choices for them. What I mean by that is we intend to open our physical schools on August 31st, but we want to give families and we want to give staff, our faculty, the choice of whether they participate in person or remotely. There is some faith built into that statement, because the numbers have to work out for that to be something that's viable in our school community. But that's our hope, that we are able to give people the choice so that to match their comfort level with school. And that's going to be something that is really important, because no one should feel compelled to come to school if they're not comfortable, and no one should feel as if they need to stay in a remote environment if they really need that experience in the physical school. And so we're going to strive to make sure that everyone has that choice, while each of us remain responsible for our part in the process. So with that said, we're planning on breaking the school year into shorter segments of time that allow flexibility for parents, flexibility for students, for our staff to respond to changing conditions. This is not as easy as it sounds. I'm going to spend some time unpacking it. But the thought process is that if we break our school year apart into shorter segments, we'll be able to have that flexibility in scheduling to adapt to the changing conditions. More on that in a bit. If that's going to be how we attack this issue, then we've got to create redundancy and flexibility for our teachers. We've got to create the ability for teachers who are suddenly unavailable to have redundancy and for learning to keep continuing and to take place. More on that coming a little bit later. Each one of our students is going to need a key point of contact in their education. They're going to need to rely on someone that they can have as a consistent person to contact, whether that student is home or in person, and whether that teacher is home or in person. We need to make sure that our students have consistent points of contact within our school community. While individual classes might have redundancy and might have to make adjustments based on availability of people, that anchoring adult component has to be something that remains consistent during this coming school year. Our professional staff, what we're asking of them this coming year is a serious lift, is a significant challenge. They're up for it and they're capable. I know that they have what it takes, but our role in that is to support them with significant professional development and time for them to be ready for this coming school year. More on that later when I talk through timeline, but it's a commitment that we have to providing our teachers with the tools that they need to be successful for what we're asking of them. This is probably obvious to many, but socially distancing is important and is key. And one key component of that is to leverage our outdoor opportunities whenever possible. And more on that later when it comes to resource allocation. But we need to take advantage of the beautiful grounds that we have to spread people out and to reduce our building load whenever possible. And even sometimes when it may be a little chilly outside, we need to take advantage of our outdoor opportunities, and there are plenty of them for us. The first segment of our school year has got to focus on the connection piece. Our communication strategies, our organization, all of that work that we need to do to make sure our school year is successful. Our first segment of the school year needs to be focused on that. And that in some ways means that we're starting small and we're going to build momentum over the course of the year, and need to say to ourselves that that's okay. The reason the end of our school year ended so well in many ways was because of those relationships that were already established between teachers, students, and staff. We're not going to be able to start that way this fall, and so we've got to have a commitment to making sure that that's a priority for us so that we can sustain the challenges and the bumps that might come down the pike. And then the last key strategy is we're investigating the possibility of having staggered start and end times for our school day, meaning each school would have 2 start times and 2 end times for the purpose of limiting our building load and offering the opportunity to have social distancing on buses. Our first initial look at this from a logistics perspective shows that up to about 40% of our day could have our buildings reduced by about half of the population in the building. That seems to make some good sense if we can make it work. This is really complicated with bus schedules and who's going to drive their children to school and drop them off and all of that. But we think it's worth investigating if we can make the schedule side of it work, because again, it reduces our building load significantly for a good portion of our school day. We think that's an advantage for us. So one of the key tenets of our plan, if we understand that the school year is going to be dynamic and that conditions are going to be unpredictable, we feel like we need to adapt a sort of a classification system for the relative risk in our community and the safety protocols that go along with that particular risk. And so we've developed a classification system, and I want to run through that, and I have some more details following this, but in general, it's a way to categorize risk and to categorize our situation and determine the modality that are available to us. Red means that the school campus is closed. We're only remote learning. That's akin to what we did this past spring. Orange is the school campus is open only for priority or small group access, small group purposes. So students with special needs or other very specific reasons, but otherwise we would remain in remote learning for most of our students. Yellow is how we would categorize our school campus being open, but with there being significant safety and social distancing restrictions. And more on this in a minute, but yellow is where we would say that our requirements for things like masks become a requirement, not a recommendation. Not something that we say we ought to do, but something that we say we will do because it's the relative risk level in our community is high enough that supports a more restrictive on-campus experience. Green is when our school campus is open, but we still have recommended guidelines in place for social distancing, masks, cleaning, et cetera. And then blue is something that we hope to achieve at some point, which is near normal campus access, where we expect 99 out of 100 students to be attending school in person, and we allow things like the use of masks, but they're not required or necessarily even recommended because conditions have returned to near normal for us. So let me unpack those just a little bit. First, how do we make the decision what status we're in? Well, as we've learned through this process, a lot of it falls to us at the local level. We're coming up with our plan for how to reopen. We're going to make the decision for what our status is and what our local determination of health is. And so that's number one for us, is how we collectively decide where we need to be as a school community. In doing that, we're going to rely heavily on what the federal government, our governor, the Department of Health and Human Services has decided, or any executive orders that are in place. There's lots of data upon which we can rely, and we'll certainly use that. Local case counts, hospitalization, mortality data, positivity rate for testing, all of that can be used to help inform our decision-making process. We might have some resource availability issues that affect our ability to make certain determinations. If we can't get a hold of the appropriate PPE, we might need to restrict our status level and go to orange instead of yellow, for example, because we don't have the PPE to support our staff and students in the school. The relative comfort level of our school community, meaning how our community feels about what's going on is important. That sounds wishy-washy, but it's actually very important. If we think back to March 9th when we closed our schools, there were not any cases of COVID-19 in either one of our communities, but we all felt as if the right thing to do was to close our schools at that time. We might feel differently about that moving forward because of just how things have changed around us and our relative comfort level. So that will inform our decision making. And then it's true that as the quality of our remote instructional model changes, that might affect our decision making in regards to which modality we put in place at a given point in time. But I want to unpack those statuses in a little bit more detail. So the campus closed, full remote, that's pretty obvious. There's no safety protocols because we're not accessing the campus. And simply put, our schools are unavailable to anybody. But orange, yellow, and green are where I'm going to spend a little bit of time unpacking them. So orange is as this says, we're not ready to fully close a school, but provide priority access to our students who need it. We'll have the most strict cleaning protocols in place during that time. There'll be required masks for anyone who's on campus who are able. And there'll be, as these things go through here, a lot of this will be repeated on the next slide, but there'll be an effort to minimize travel within the building and to ensure that social distancing happens at all time. We are investigating the possibility of asking our staff, can you be tested every 2 weeks for COVID-19? And is that a viable thing to request of our staff in this sort of modality? Moving on to yellow, when the campus is open to all staff and students who choose to come to school, this is where we say that we have requirements for things like social distancing and the use of masks. So let me talk through some of that. In a yellow status, we would say that all students in grades 5 through 12 who are able, while indoors and when 6 to 10 feet of social distancing is not possible, that they would be required to wear a mask. What this means is when students are in the hallway, they're going to be wearing a mask. When students are in a classroom and they're not more than 6 to 10 feet away from other students or a faculty member, they're going to be wearing a mask. We feel that that's incredibly important. When the risk level is high enough to warrant being at this status, then masks ought to be a requirement. Staff will be required as well when there can't be more than 6 to 10 feet away from other people. They'll be required to wear a mask as well while on campus. We're going to be minimizing travel within the building when we're in this status. That means students will not likely be accessing the cafeteria. Students won't be leaving their designated classroom when possible, but instead we'll be making adjustments to have adults come to them when necessary, that sort of thing. So we'll make a significant effort to minimize the travel within the building to limit exposure between groups of people. Social distancing will be prioritized but not required within classrooms. What does that mean? Well, again, this is somewhat of a numbers issue, but our classrooms don't fit all of our students. And when we're in a fully socially distant model. So if social distancing is not possible within a classroom, then students will wear masks. And that will be something that we'll have to do within classrooms. We'll need school board policy to support this, because if we're saying that masks are a requirement, that doesn't mean that we're asking people to wear a mask, it's saying we're requiring it. And just like any other sort of parts of our policy where there are requirements, there needs to be the ability to enforce that policy. I fully support building our culture of safety and building the support within our culture to support things like wearing masks and socially distancing from one another. But again, if conditions in our community are at this level of risk, then we need to have the ability to enforce that policy. There also needs to be policy restricting the access of symptomatic people to our building. It's dubious whether a school has the ability right now with our current policies to restrict access to school for faculty or students who are ill, who have a fever, who have cough, cold, runny nose, etc. But we need to investigate with our school board the ability to have a policy that actually can restrict our access to school. Something that helps quite a bit is that the remote option for school should be available to all of our students and for our faculty to participate in that. And so we're not restricting the access to education, we're restricting access to the building. And that's a key differentiation from a typical policy that might restrict access to school. And then again, based on numbers, there may be the need for the potential for restricting access to the school building based on what we can handle in the school building and the availability of our faculty who choose to attend on campus. More on that in a little bit. Green is the next status from yellow, where again, we would have the full campus open, but now we have a differentiation between a requirement for masks and social distancing and a suggestion, meaning we will encourage everyone who wants to wear a mask to do so. We'll encourage everyone to have socially distant behavior from one another, but it's going to be, conditions have become better in our community, and we feel that we can have this be something that we suggest, not require. And I think our community is up for that. Using our high school graduation as an example, there was a requirement for people to attend to wear masks while they were in their seats. It was not required for graduates to wear a mask when they walked across the stage, but every single one of them still did. And I really think that was out of respect for one another and for respect for their community. And I thought that really shows a lot about our school community. And so I think that even in a green situation, that most people will be wearing masks in our schools. We'll have, as much as we can, typical movement within the building, but we'll logically reduce large gatherings. We may not have an assembly with the entire 6th grade class at one time. There's not a requirement to have assemblies like that. So when it's logical and when it makes sense, we'll reduce the reduction of large gatherings when we're in status green. And then blue, as I mentioned before, is where we say we've approached a near normal state. Our cleaning protocols will remain. We'll allow the use of masks in classrooms or in schools, meaning we're not going to say that people can't wear masks ever. That's something we'll probably never, ever say. But we've really attempted to close down our remote instructional model because approaching 99 to 100% of our students and faculty are back feeling comfortable being in the building. All right, so those are how we see, again, as just a way to classify our relative level of risk in our community and how it affects our protocols and procedures in response to what's going on in our community. So we think that'll be helpful for people to understand and to use as a guide. Next, I want to talk about the school year and how we intend to break apart the school year into segments. So we intend to break the school year up into 10 roughly equal segments, and I'll show you exactly what they are in the next slide. But the idea is for each segment to have the ability for people to change between being in person or remote during that change in segment. We know there are times when people might need to immediately go from in-person to remote if they test positive for COVID-19 or something like that. But in general, we hope that parents and our faculty will take advantage of the natural breaks that these segments create to make shifts. Because what we'll do is 2 weeks ahead of each segment, we'll notify what we expect to be our status level for that upcoming segment and what protocols will be in place to give parents and our faculty the opportunity to make their decision for what they're going to do during that next segment. And then that will give us a couple of weeks to prepare and make any adjustments to our school schedule based on what the preferences of our people. Again, this is a little bit of a leap of faith because we're saying we don't know what choices people will make during our school year, but given the uncertain nature of this situation, it seems like a fool's errand to make one plan for the entire year and to try to make parents or even our faculty commit to one modality for a whole semester or for a whole school year. We just expect there to be some flexibility and some fluidity in people's choices. Doing that will give, we hope what it will do is allow each segment of our curriculum to provide a natural break that makes it easy for people to make that choice. Now, more on that later, but if you're a teacher watching this, you're already thinking, okay, so now you're asking me to realign my entire school year's worth of curriculum. And the answer to that is, yeah, we think that that's one of the necessary compromises for this system to work. And we're going to provide opportunity for you to do that with support later this summer leading up to the school year. What we think the strength of this plan is that we don't have to figure out the entire school year to start. We've got to get to August 31st with people feeling ready to either come back or start online, and to be prepared for that and know what task we have ahead of us. Also, having segments like this will allow us to maximize our learning times during low impact safety concerns. And what that really means is we're putting things like school vacations on the table and are going to say that those might be in flux for this coming year. If conditions are really safe and we're doing really well in the spring, we might choose, like we did this past spring, to go right through April vacation and end our school year a week early and maximize our summer like we did this particular year. But we'll have that opportunity with this type of altered schedule. And then our goal is really, we target Memorial Day. It's a little bit arbitrary, but if we shoot for Memorial Day as our natural ending point, we can use June as a time to wrap up and to fill in gaps and to wrap up our school year as necessary. And who knows? I have to tell you that we don't know for sure how things are going to go as we go through the fall, winter, and spring. But if we start with a mindset of let's shoot for Memorial Day as our natural ending point, then we have June available to us to wrap things up. And so here are the segments. No one needs to worry about memorizing these or writing these down. But a couple of things about these is you'll note that they're all 4 to 5 weeks long. The ones that are 5 weeks long usually have a school vacation week in there because you'll see that the number of school days is fairly consistent. The 4-week period we think makes sense because of how the school year lands naturally. There's 4 weeks between the Thanksgiving and winter holiday. There's 8 weeks between New Year's and February vacation. There's 8 weeks between February and April, and 4 between April and Memorial Day. And so we think that 4-week time period is the right size, and we think it gives our first segment the opportunity to shake things out and to figure out any challenges that we have, and also to give parents and faculty an early decision point for making a decision to do the opposite of what they started with. Some students might choose to start the school year in person and find that the safety protocols are onerous and uncomfortable for them, and might choose to go and shift to the remote model for the second segment, or vice versa. Students and faculty who start at home might find that they see how the protocols are working well in school and might decide that they can come on campus starting in the second segment. And so that's our draft of how we see the school year being broken up. Some initial things that are still on the table for us. And this is an acknowledgement from me, that there are things on the table that we still have to work through and to acknowledge are going to be different this coming year. I've already talked through the school year calendar, vastly different arrangement and setup for us. Vacation schedules I mentioned, of course we're not going to have school on Thanksgiving Day or Christmas week, but things like February and April vacation are things that we need to say might be on the table to be either rescheduled, moved, canceled, et cetera, based on the conditions and where we're at. I think we did well not having April vacation this past year and ending a week early. So that sort of thing has to remain on the table. Snow days. Everybody loves snow days, but they're probably going to look different moving forward. In particular, I think that there'll no longer be a need to, I'm sorry if you can hear that siren. There will probably no longer be a need to extend our school year past the original end date because of snow. We still might take snow days, but we can take advantage of using the remote learning opportunities that we've all developed to make sure our school year ends on time and isn't extended. To be honest with all of our community, I'm not sure field trips are something that we can count on this coming year. Things like ecology school and all fourth grade field trips to the State House, those sorts of things, I think will be a real challenge for us this coming year, and we've not made decisions on that. For us, extracurriculars and athletics are really important. They're a valuable part of the educational process, and they mean a lot to our students. They're a big inspiration and motivating tool for our students. And so we need to do what we can to make sure that they're going to happen. Some of that is outside of our control. We know that. We know that the NHIAA, Tri-County League, et cetera, are going to make decisions that affect us, but it's our hope that we can safely have all of those things. We don't expect that there will be much outside access to our school buildings this coming year. And that's too bad, because we have a really strong volunteer base. We have strong community support and participation in our school, but clearly our priority needs to be to limit access to outside people into our school communities, to limit exposure. Things like internships and ELOs for our high school students, I want to say to you that those things are largely on the table this coming year. We always view students as individuals, and their opportunities to do things that speak to their talents and their interests. We need to be particularly motivated to encourage those unique opportunities this coming year. Meaning, if a student wants to have an internship at a large corporation nearby this coming school year, and that's something that can support an English credit for them, or a science credit, or something like that, we need to be adaptable and to support that if we can. Again, helping to provide individualization to our students, but also limiting building access is not a bad thing. One thing right off the bat that we know about our schedule: Tuesday, September 8th, the day after Labor Day, that's primary election day in our state. We certainly won't have school in person that day, because we're not going to mix those two populations of people. But we can already say that's going to be our first opportunity with our new cohorts of students to have a remote only day, sort of a test flight for snow days and for a fully remote learning experience moving forward. And so we can say right now, we know September 8th is our first chance to shake that out. And then one thing we're really unsure about is bus transportation. Bus transportation, I'll speak more about when we talk about our staggered schedule planning, but we're going to have to work closely with our bus companies to ensure that we have available bus transportation. State law requires us to provide bus transportation for students in grades 1 through 8 who live more than 2 miles from the school. Currently, we provide bus transportation for everyone, regardless of whether they live and what grade level they're in. But I think we need to say that based on availability of drivers and routes and what we need to do to ensure distancing on school buses, that we might need to relook at what bus transportation we provide moving forward. So that leads to what resources we think we're going to need to make all of this work moving forward. Number one, teacher professional development. Our teachers are going to need time over the summer for all of the work to support what needs to happen in the fall. We anticipate 5 to 7 or 10 days for each teacher leading up to our school year in paid professional development to be prepared for the start of the school year. And then built into our schedules, which are likely to have to be revamped, our daily school schedules, they need to have ongoing opportunities for instructional strategy support to support remote learning or to support just the new normal that we're all experiencing. Outdoor teaching resources. So to make use of our campuses, two things that come to mind that we know we're going to need to investigate. First of all, campus security, to secure all of our various campuses and to make sure that they're safe for the outdoor learning environment, and then equipment to support those outdoor learning stations. Next, in the cleaning and sanitization part, our full-time custodial staff is going to be receiving additional training this summer, and they're going to be deployed as the primary cleaning, sanitization, and the crew to do all of that disinfecting work on a daily basis. This is an important time to mention our science and medical subgroup has let us know we should anticipate having cases of COVID-19 in our school community as we move forward. With that being the case, I have to act as if we can find out that there were active cases in our school on a Monday, but that the school is safe and ready to be used on a Tuesday, meaning that every night we treat every day as if we need to prepare that school to be safe the very next day on an everyday basis. And so our custodial staff has to be the people that are trained to do that. And so we're going to need more support, whether it's employees, part-time workers, or even trained community volunteers to support some of the things that need to happen during the day. Because of our staff is already stretched thin at the custodial level. And to do that kind of job where we feel our school is safe for that next day, we're going to need additional resources there. And then the obvious, hand washing stations, hand sanitizer, PPE for faculty and staff, additional PPE for students who don't have it or don't bring it with them. All of that will be a continued resource need and strain on our community. Technology, we're going to need to continue that support for the one-to-one computing environment we had this past spring that worked so well, and also work to ensure that all of our households continue to have reliable internet connectivity, which we believe all of them do at this time. Next, and this is a big one, I don't want to diminish this one in any way. We need to seriously look at the quality of our air inside our school buildings. As people have known who've paid attention, we test our school air quality 4 times a year, and we've been doing that regularly for the past couple of years. And we know exactly what kind of air we provide in our schools. And while our air quality meets the standards, there is nothing that precludes us from having school because of our air quality. If we built our schools as brand new schools today, none of them would match the indoor air quality requirements of new construction. And so in our long-term capital maintenance plan, we have in there over the next several years plans to update and replace our HVAC systems in I think all of our school buildings. And so we're going to need to look at perhaps speeding up that process, because air quality is certainly a major consideration in the safety of our schools, and making sure that our schools have the right air quality. We're going to have to look very seriously at that. The good news is we've already taken some steps. So this past spring, our school board supported the use of end-of-year funding to upgrade the building control systems at a couple of our buildings, and that makes a big difference. Without even changing systems, changes to the control system makes a big difference. And so that's already happening. Roger Preston, our new facilities manager, is highly trained in the preventative maintenance side of HVAC systems and can ensure that we're following that preventative maintenance and air filter replacement program with fidelity, and making sure it's doing the best we can with the equipment we have. But we're going to have to talk about a plan for the system level upgrades to bring our buildings to the latest air quality standards, because that's really important. And it's not cheap, multi-million-dollar projects to make that happen. And then bus transportation we've hit on and mentioned, but in order to support staggered arrival and departure times, that means we need increased flexibility of our bus schedules. Something to consider for us is the before and after school care. I've heard from so many parents that rely on our school system for their children to be part of their plans to allow them to work. And so our New Mornings program, for example, has already reached out, and they're willing to support us and help us and be a partner, continue to be a partner for us moving forward. But we're going to have to continue to provide those and investigate additional ones to make sure that we're supporting parents who need to go to work. I've mentioned the policy adjustments before, but are listing them here. And then in our community, we're going to need some additional adults. Some of you that are part of the school community, we're going to be asking you to step up this coming year as either volunteers for security, as long-term substitutes in the custodial realm, what have you, we're going to be relying on people to help support our process, because it's going to be a different process. And for our teachers, they're going to need support for them to be successful. We know that. And then our school boards, what we're laying out here is not adjustments, minor adjustments to our school or to our school year. And so our labor unions deserve the opportunity to have a discussion about impact bargaining, and for the opportunity to meet with our school boards and to have those conversations about the impact of what we're asking of them. So lots of resource needs to make this happen. These resources we want to discuss in more detail on August 10th, and they might require for us to consider things like, if we cannot get grant funding to support us, that we look at things like special meetings to ask voters for additional support. Hoping that's not the case, but we need to be realistic that for us to achieve our objective, all students making a year of academic progress or more safely, that resources are going to be required to make that happen and to happen well. So looking at this from 3 different points of view. First, if I'm a teacher, boil all this down and make this sort of understandable just from my lens and from my perspective. So as a teacher, what we think your responsibilities and expectations will be for this coming year is to serve as that primary contact with a small group of students, providing that consistent connection to those students where you're an anchoring adult for them. You're either going to be instructing on campus or remote, not both at the same time. That's our desired commitment to you, to have you not have to do that. Now, you might be doing your remote teaching from our school if that's more convenient for you. If you don't have internet access at home that's reliable or what have you, you can certainly come to school, but we're not going to be asking you to have a camera on you in a classroom and having some students in front of you and some students at home over the internet. We don't think that makes any sense. But within your small group of teachers that we're going to create for you, there's going to be a need to plan, coordinate, support, and work with the mix of on-campus and remote students. And if we do the right planning side of putting you in a group of teachers that can be flexible within that group, then your commitment really is to that small group of teachers and to working with them to support things as they change and to support the dynamic nature of this coming school year. Along with that, something that is a change is that we will think about each section of a given course moving together. Because if there's going to be people that make changes at the end of each school year segment, then we have to make sure that our courses, that our sections of a course remain on the same pace, and to ensure that flexibility of people going back and forth. We're going to learn about that. Frankly, I think that this is something that as we start our school year, we're going to become better attuned to what it really means to have this work well, and we're going to get better at this as we go. But it just makes sense that if people are coming in and out, that each given section's got to move at the same pace within a course. And then if you're a teacher, obviously your participation in professional development and the decision-making process, whenever possible, is really key. So we as myself, others as administrators, school boards, we are not on the ground working with students and families on a daily basis. And so teachers, as we go through this planning process, you're going to see in our timeline that there are opportunities for you to participate in that decision-making process. We're, in some ways, we've got time. It's July 9th. And in other ways, we've got not a lot of time. It's already July 9th. And so there will be some things where maybe you cannot participate, but we hope that you really do have that desire. If you have that desire to participate in discussions with us, that you do that. And then you also have a responsibility to let us know what you're doing, whether you're remaining on campus or staying at home. Again, we want to support that and give you that choice to do that. And then you have to let us know what your comfort level is. So that's kind of what we see the job of teachers moving forward. And by the way, back to the resources, I didn't list exhaustively everything. There are things like expanded space for our nurses, as an example. That's a resource need that we have. We have different building needs that we're going to have to build walls or install different things. There's a lot of that along the way that just wasn't mentioned but it is spelled out in the document that I'll be sharing at the end of this presentation. So after teachers, if you're a student, what's your responsibility? Well, first, it's that primary contact again with your anchoring adult and communicating each day about what's going on and communicating your needs with that person. Communicating with your teachers about your status and what you're doing, whether you're coming to school or not. You have a responsibility as a student to own your learning, advocate for your own social, emotional well-being with us as a school community. We know that many of our students do that very well, but that's something that we need to empower and encourage all students to be able to do. As a student, your expectation to understand and to participate in the established safety guidelines is really important. Creating that culture of safety is most of what we have to do to make this whole plan work. And then to be a part of building that positive and supporting learning culture. And as a parent, what is your responsibility? Well, actively partner with us. We need you to be a partner with us in making all of this work, because if we would have rolled out all of these changes to you for a typical school year, it would be a little scary, quite frankly. We all know that we're in this together, but we're going to really need our parents to help us figure this out and to give us feedback, to work with us, and to come alongside us as we go down this road together. Communicating with your child's anchoring adult, that's going to be something we ask you to do on a regular basis. That person will be your key point of contact, and to let us know about your kids' academic and social emotional needs as they go. Supporting your child during remote learning. So we know this from this past spring. Remote learning is a burden for parents. Maybe burden's not the right word, but it requires effort on behalf of parents to make it successful. And so while we want to improve our remote learning experience for your child, we know that if your child is home, that we're going to need you to partner with us in supporting and making sure that works for them and is successful for them. And then asking you to be someone who contributes to our healthy school environment, keeping kids home when they're ill, not sending kids to school when they have a fever. All of those things are things that we're going to need you to see as part of your responsibility. We all know what it's like when we have other things to do and we've got to get to work and we really need our kid to go to school. But this is not the time for us to be having risks when it comes to unhealthy students in our school. And then as always, advocating for your child about their needs. So timeline for all of this, I want to take a few moments to walk through what we see as the timeline. As I mentioned at the beginning. So between next week and the week after, the 16th and the 23rd, I'm hoping that the subgroups will be able to meet and gather feedback about this plan as we start to move forward. I will say to you that nothing in this plan is set in stone. Nothing in here is finalized. Nothing here is a done deal. Nothing is determined yet. And so we are going to build this as a community plan, meaning we're all going to work together to figure this out and to get this right. And so feedback in those subgroups is critical in having that happen. On July 23rd, subgroup chairs will provide reports, feedback from the subgroups. And then between then and the 30th, I and my team will be working to hear all of those edits and try to put a lot more meat on this plan to have it be ready to be finalized on July 30th. Starting around July 23rd through August 10th, we're going to encourage our school boards to reach out to our associations and engage in impact bargaining if deemed necessary. And then, as I said, July 30th we finalize, and then August 10th we have that SAU board meeting to deal with policy issues, resource appropriation actions, including that potential for special school district meetings moving forward if necessary. Once the school board is on board on August 10th to the 28th is really where we're doing the professional development for our faculty and staff whenever possible. As we mentioned before, we think it's 5, 7, or 10 days of professional development that will be required to help support our faculty and to prepare them. We certainly can't require our faculty to participate in that professional development, but we'll offer that because we want to make sure that all of our teachers are prepared as best we possibly can for this coming school year. Around August 17th, that's the latest date that we'll say this is the protocols and status as we start the school year, meaning are we red, orange, yellow, green, or blue? Just to head off a question before I hear it, if I had to make a determination today, what would it be? It would likely be yellow, meaning that we would start in the required state when it comes to safety protocols. I think the data in New Hampshire might tell us that green could be appropriate, but we need to gain some confidence and some, what's the right word? We need to gain some experience with our safety protocols and help people feel comfortable in our schools. For a lot of people, that first step back onto the school campus will be a challenge. And so starting in a more restrictive state than maybe what's required, it probably provides that opportunity to gain that confidence and to help people feel comfortable. So with that said, between now and August 19th, we're going to be asking you as a community, as teachers and as parents, what you think you will do with that first segment of the school year. But on August 19th, we're going to need you to make that decision for us, because that gives us a little bit of time to be ready for that first day. We're hoping that we have a pretty good indication well before that, because this is not a simple process to schedule and move things around as much as we're doing. It's the right work to do, and we need to do it this way because conditions change rapidly. So we can't expect parents to make a decision on August 1st, but we're hoping that we have a sense before August 19th so we can be prepared. And then August 31st is our intended first day of school, where we plan to open the school day. And I'm just going to say, I am very firm that August 31st has to be our first day of school. We need to get kids back to school. We need to get back into the swing of things. Even if we have to go into a more restrictive status, even higher than yellow, fine, but August 31st is something that if you're a parent, we hope you can count on to have us start back in school. So with that said, as I'm wrapping up now, an hour into this, this link takes you to what is the more lengthy document, and I'll put this in the chat for people so they can click on it and go to it, and we'll post this on Facebook, etc., and other places. But this has a lot more detail in it and adds a little more color to a lot about what we talked about, and we'll add to it as we get down the road. And then we will be asking folks, if you can, to take some time and fill out this survey after having heard everything we've talked about today and give us some feedback. It's anonymous. This is not a survey that you have to give your name or anything else like that, but we're going to start gauging the relative comfort level of our parents with what we're talking about. So that's it. That's our opening draft of our plan. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then see if there are questions from our panelists right off the bat. So I noticed there were a bunch of Q&A questions that were being put forward. I don't know if people on this panel feel comfortable answering some of those by typing in answers to them, but I thought I would just open it up to the panel and just ask if you have initial reactions, questions, and thoughts. I do want to encourage you, for some of us who've been working on this the past couple of weeks, we had to go through a thought process to get comfortable with some of these ideas. And so I know you're hearing this for the first time. So I'm going to encourage you to take some time to think, and you don't have to be put on the spot today, but if you have initial reactions, I'd appreciate hearing them. Anybody? Go ahead, Shannon Gascoigne.
All right, I'll crack the egg. Question on, so the online option being a choice, is that intended for K to 12? Is there any, anything different being offered to the younger kids or the older kids, or you're talking choice across the board?
We're talking choice across the board, but something that we're discussing and we need to keep discussing is about kindergarten. So remember, our first grade students, most of them we had as kindergarten students last year. And so we find it difficult to imagine first, second, third grade kids being in a remote environment, for that being nearly as successful. But we're going to support that. Kindergarten, we're considering saying that there is not a remote option for kindergarten. Meaning, if you don't feel comfortable sending your child to school this year, that perhaps you wait a year and wait for kindergarten for a year. We're going to ask our community how they feel about that, because that might be a little touchy for people, but we're trying to envision a scenario where kids that we've never met before, and they have to exist in a remote environment only. And some of those students who may have never even been to preschool or been to school before, we find that to be a really challenging prospect, and that it just may not be as valuable as waiting a year to start their school experience. But beyond that, 1st through 12, yes, remote option for everybody, for sure. And we certainly understand the challenges for younger kids, but we're hoping it's 1 through 12.
Great, thanks. And then I also noted that the in the yellow status, masks are required for 5 to 12. So in the primary or the elementary school, that's not going to be a requirement, even if when we're at a yellow status. I just want to be clear on.
Well, so this is a draft, and I'm going to ask the science and medical folks to provide us with their thoughts about this, but we're just thinking that the natural cutoff point might be when you go to Amherst Middle School, you have to wear a mask. When you're at Clark Wilkins or you're in grades K through 4 at Mount Vernon Village School, you don't, because we're just trying to envision how that could be successful. Now, I will tell you that Anna Perrell at Clark Wilkins and Kim Sarfty at Mount Vernon Village School, our new principal there, they're already working on plans that significantly limit the exposure of students and staff within the school community that might, we hope, make parents feel more comfortable without it being a requirement. Will not stop any child from wearing a mask. If a parent wants their child to wear a mask, we'll certainly let them do that, but not require it for those younger students.
Thank you.
Amy Facey, then Katie Kennedy.
Thanks, Adam. So I would anticipate there being a need to customize some of the scheduling by building. So I'm wondering how that will happen. So for example, at the high school, you may have like an AP course that is being taught by a particular teacher, and maybe perhaps they choose to stay remote, but many of the students are going to be in person. So that's just one example. So I'm wondering how those building level decisions are going to be determined.
Yeah, we've already started with that. And Mike and his team have already started that initial process. High school, the flip side of kindergarten, 1st grade, high school is probably a little bit easier to work in a more flexible environment. But those are the things that we have to work through, which might involve limiting the access to some electives this year and having alternate years for electives, things like that, that allow for that redundancy. Because what we can't have is we can't have Sue Donner teach an AP course and be the only person teaching it, and then Sue becomes unavailable for some reason, right? Now we've created a real detriment to our students there. So the redundancy piece is key to allow for there to be people that come in and out and move back and forth. And so one of the compromises to that might be a limitation on what courses are offered this year. However, I will say that with the potential for a staggered schedule, and we're in early discussions about this, folks. I'm not even sure this can work, to be transparent. But there's a potential for students at the high school level to potentially take an extra class by saying, early or coming early and staying late type of thing that might give them an enrichment opportunity or the opportunity to do something like an ELO or internship with some of that extra time that we have there. So there's some give and take for sure, and we've not worked it all out. Frankly, we don't want to get too far down the road if there are major roadblocks that you folks bring forward that we didn't think of, but that's our initial thinking. Katie Kennedy.
Hey, Adam. So just to bounce back to Shannon, so we could possibly reconsider the mask wearing for K-4, like in our smaller group task force or at our next meeting or something like that, right?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yep. Meaning you might prefer it.
Like maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So there's nothing precluding us encouraging the use or what have you. We're thinking about, like, when you make a requirement for something, that means it has to be, it can't be like wearing baseball hats where some teachers enforce it and others don't. It's got to be, this is a safety protocol that is a requirement, meaning that when students refuse to, there's got to be a consequence for that, or up to and including, think about a student getting suspended from school for repeatedly not wearing a mask in school, right? We have to be pretty thoughtful about how we get to that point. And at some point, there's an age where there's diminishing returns there. And for teachers, I understand that changes your comfort level as well. And so as Anna talks through what they're thinking for how they plan to address that, that might make teachers feel more comfortable, but I understand that's a touchy one. And maybe we have to lower that requirement down to some lower grade level for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Stephen O'Keefe and then Shannon Gascoigne.
Yes, a quick question with regards to the staggered schedules. What is sort of the thought process now of potentially when that would be implemented? Is it something we're looking at for September? Is it something we'd look at once we hit a particular trigger point with our district status? And more importantly, like the logistics surrounding that, do students get assigned, parents volunteer? Like the logistics there, I'm assuming are extremely overwhelming.
Yeah, the logistics there are intense. I won't say overwhelming. But our intention would be that parents do have the option to choose the early or the late, if that works. The reason why a staggered schedule is so appealing is with an hour or an hour and a half shift in start and end time, based on the length of our school day, that means that for about 40% of the day, we've got half the building load. And from a social distancing perspective, and just from an arrival and depart dismissal perspective, that seems really appealing to me if we can make that work. Meaning that only half the kids are arriving at one time or being dismissed at one time, and and that's also limiting the number of students on buses. Now there's an expense associated with that. The buses are gonna have to run longer, or we're gonna need more buses, one or the other. And that costs something, but I don't know how else we provide safe bus transportation with social distancing without doing something like that. So our hope is to work it out where there is an opportunity for parents to choose and say what they'd like. That depends on faculty availability as well, for faculty having to choose what they want to do. And so it's probably not going to be possible, right? I might be a little bit hopeful and thinking it's all going to work out perfectly, but we're hoping we can get it pretty close, and that helps us reduce our building load in a way that doesn't do things like AB schedules or alternating days or alternating schedules, that sort of thing. That's really the goal.
And so just a quick follow-up there. When do you think something like that would need to be implemented? Is that when we go to yellow or to heighten red or blue, or
Yep.
like what are your thoughts on that?
Yellow and green. Anytime we're yellow and green, we would attempt to make that limitation. And so I expect us to start this school year. As I said, if I had to choose today, it'd probably be yellow. And we would attempt to start with that staggered schedule if possible. Our initial look is that each building will have a schedule that's, one of the two schedules will be similar to last year's schedule. So if that's a schedule you're used to and feel comfortable with, you'd still have that as an option. But this is going to be a numbers game where we ask parents and faculty, what's your preference? And then we have to see if it works, because it may not. It may not work with buses, may not work with our schedule in our building. For a host of reasons, it just may not work out. But again, it seems like a worthy exercise to go through based on what it does to our limiting our building load. Good. Shannon Gascoigne.
Thanks. So I wasn't position on the mask at the elementary school. I was just trying to clarify that I understood the plan. And then I love the color-coded response system, and I'm just curious if there may be an opportunity to work with the town, or the towns rather, on that, kind of deciding in conjunction you know, in collaboration with the town leadership, kind of when we arrive at each level.
Meaning like, so the transfer station, maybe they adopt the same thing, and if it's yellow, they have a protocol for yellow. If it's green, that sort of thing. I'm certainly open to that. I mean, maybe just by show of hands to the task force, is that classification system a helpful thing? Does that help do we think? Yeah, okay. All right, that's good. That's helpful. Other questions or reactions from the group? Peter King.
Thanks. First of all, I got to say, I'm really impressed with the work that's been done here. Been trying to follow what's coming from the feds or what's coming from the state, and I'm sorely disappointed with any kind of guidance that's coming out. On this committee, I'm representing the community, and as a community member, I do have a question. A lot of these things, there's a lot of redundancy here. There's a lot of choices, and to me, that means extra money. If we're doubling things up, if we're putting more buses on, if we're building outdoor play spaces, and I think these, or teaching spaces, and I think these are all great, but how are you controlling budget, and what is the, you know, how is that factoring in? It's got to be a huge task in itself.
Yeah, it is. And thank you, Peter. So we are going to have that conversation with our school board and then with our community about the resources we need to make this happen. It's been evident to me that to do this all safely requires us to make some investment in order to make this happen. So I'm going to work from a standpoint that I want to use the buses we have and see if we can find a way to make that work where we don't need more buses. Or if we do need something else with buses, that it's a small extension to each bus route that costs us a little bit of money and not additional buses altogether that cost a lot of money. When it comes to outdoor spaces, if we can do some simple things or even have community volunteers help us in preparation for making those spaces work with us. I mean, we're thinking things as simple as desks, you know, chairs and tables that can be outside that can be used for that sort of thing. So I think there's going to be some expense here. The biggest is around HVAC and air quality. That is absolutely by far the biggest thing. Now, it's not an unexpected expense because we know about all of them. In all of our schools, we have a plan at some point to address them. This, in my opinion, is a catalyst to perhaps address them more quickly. As a side note, and I'll just opine for a second, there is federal dollars that have been made available for COVID-19 support for local school districts. But again, that formula is based on the free and reduced numbers, which in our two communities are very low, which isn't a bad thing. But that means that the funding that's going to Manchester, as an example, is not proportional to the funding that's going to us. Manchester's a lot bigger school system, but I mean the proportional amount, the amount per student or per grade level or what have you. And so in some ways we're on our own as far as that goes, and that can be a little frustrating. If there's grant funds available, we're going to continue to investigate that. Nate Jensen.
So thanks, Adam. I just wanted to make one observation, and I think this has been an excellent presentation. I think that you've come at it from the right philosophy, and I've shared this with you privately. That my main concern is that we allow everyone to calculate the risk that they're comfortable with, because ultimately it's got to come down to the decisions of the parents, what they are comfortable with doing. And unfortunately, that's the nature of life. And right now, we're living life a little bit more fully than I think a lot of us would like to be. So it feels to me like you've come at it from the right philosophy of giving parents the choice to decide what they are comfortable with and what the risk factors of their children and their families are. So I just want to commend you for taking that approach. I think that's excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Trying to look at faces and see if anyone else has questions. Jolene.
Hi, Adam. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I had a question. You said that we're not sure whether the staggered start will work. If it doesn't work, what would have been your backup plan to that? Like, what's the what would be the plan B to reduce the amount of people in the building at one time going forward if that turns out to be logistically really difficult?
Yeah, and so we're not sure we can have a plan that successfully reduces people in a building at one time. So if that were the case, then we would have to go to the status orange and say that we're restricting access to the building, right? Because if it becomes, conditions are so bad or so tenuous that we are concerned about even having the building full for parts of the school day, then we're gonna have to say that we need to start restricting access to the building altogether, right? And I will share, so this might be helpful. In the document that that we put together that has a little bit more detail, I'll share that right now. In it, there's a page that describes the status levels in more detail, this one right here. And we have a target building load for each one of these statuses. So in red, obviously the building's closed, nobody's on campus, 0%. For priority access only, we're thinking that 10 to 25% of our community can be in the building during that time at any one time or any one school day, as an example. Yellow, we're targeting that 70% of people feel comfortable coming to the physical school and that it's safe for 70% of the building to be full, or for the building load to be 70%. That number is somewhat arbitrary, but it's based on the survey data that we've had so far, where parents have told us about 70% of them and roughly the same number of faculty and staff feel comfortable as of now coming to school. Green, we think we get closer to 90%. And then as I said before, blue is the 99% kind of near normal phase. So I don't want to go through this whole document, but that's one thing that might be helpful. But to your question, Jolene, yellow is at some point in yellow, whether we do staggered schedules or not, the whole building will be full for part of the day. And if we can't do that, then we're gonna have to go to orange. Shannon Gascoigne.
Yeah, just to echo Nate, I think that this draft really addresses a lot of the varied concerns and point of view of, that we heard in the parent and community subgroup, which is not easy. I am curious to see how the numbers shake out, especially for the staggered start times. I appreciate Jolene's question. So you said August 19th was going to be your date for parents to make their decision. So let's say 8/17, it's at yellow. August 19th, you want to have all that. Is that also for the staggered start times, or are you going to do like a pre-poll of parents and teachers beforehand to see if it's even worth exploring?
We're going to start asking all of those questions. Okay. With the start time and end time piece, I want to clarify a couple of things about that. First, that wouldn't be something we would allow parents or faculty to waver back and forth. Like if you pick the early start and end time, you're probably committed to that for a semester, say, or for maybe even the whole year, because that's something that's another variable that is probably impossible to accommodate. The second thing is, I want to be clear, our teacher workday would remain the same. We're not going to be asking teachers to work from 7:30 to 4:30 now or anything like that. If you're a teacher, you would have one of two work schedules, the early one or the later one, and it would still be the same length of school day. So I probably didn't say that clearly before, but I want to make sure that is clear. We're not looking to ask teachers to do more than what they're doing now.
And then just my final question, so every 4-ish weeks, depending on the segment, folks have the opportunity, teachers and students, to switch their online or face-to-face. Mm-hmm. So if your student's teacher so your student's in the classroom and your student's teacher opts not to come in face-to-face that next segment, that's what those teams that you're building are there to sort of hold support. Am I understanding that?
Yes, I believe that is kind of the idea. So
that the kids have so that there's some sort of
so let me give I'll give an example that is, and I don't want to get too much down the road and have people think this is the plan. So if it's safe for me to just say, as an example, pick a grade level, 3rd grade. Say that there are 3 or 4 teachers that are kind of assigned to a team, that those 3 or 4 teachers are going to work together for the entire school year as a group. Within that, there's going to be the same typical number of third grade students assigned to each teacher, but they're going to be coordinating their efforts together as a group and getting to know the other students in those other classrooms, so that if one teacher has to then go from remote to in person, that they're able to do that. So this is based on assumptions. The assumption from the data so far is that if we started school tomorrow, roughly 70% of our kids and 2/3 of our faculty and staff would want to be on campus. So if that's the case, a group of 2 or 3, or I'm sorry, 3 or 4 makes a lot of sense, because that means if a third of our students are home, then one of our teachers can be home and the others can be in person, and they can provide that redundancy that way for kids that come in and out. So I'm not doing a great job of describing that. Anna, do you want to say anything more? She's probably horrified that I called on her, but Anna Peril.
No, that was great, Adam. And I think also with that thought of a teaming approach, even if one teacher then had to go out, the classroom, the on-site teacher could even then become the remote. I mean, these are just some things that we've been thinking about as, the thought of the need for remote or the need for a teacher to have flexibility also, but, possibly that pod approach for groupings of teachers. Did that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Go back to gallery view. Anybody else? All right. Well, so hearing no more initial responses from this group, I know that doesn't mean you don't have more thoughts. I know that means that you're now thinking through the rest of this like we all have been. So I'm going to publish both documents, the PowerPoint that I walked through and the document that we put together, which, by the way, I think it's worth noting. In the document we put together, it lists some of the resources that we've relied upon to help develop this plan. So I don't want anyone to think that we've created this out of whole cloth. We have been provided with a ton of resources. These are just a few of them that we've relied upon. And I want to thank all of our community, because about a dozen people a day, I'm going to say, have been emailing me with articles or resources or references or ideas or comments. And all of that has been helpful. Please keep sending it, because every time I read another article or I learn something new. I learned about our innate and adaptive immune systems this week. I know more about T cells and B cells than I ever thought I would. Thanks, Jim. So all of that is incredibly helpful in my COVID masters I'm trying to get credit for. Keep sending that along, but please know that our resources are there and listed for people to also review them yourselves. So anyway, I'll publish all of those things. And then what I think I can do is allow people to go if you'd like. There's 177 or so here, and then I'll go through the Q&A and do what I've done in the past. There's been a request to leave the recording and the Facebook Live going during the Q&A session that I do afterwards, because people have found that helpful. So I will do that. But Kim Roberge has her hand raised. Kim.
Thanks, Adam. So my concern was, and again, you were talking about team teaching. In Mount Vernon, will we take a little thought process then going back to possibly a remote teacher doing a multi-age as we have in the past there? That was the first question. And then the other question was the same from Peter King brought up from a expense standpoint. Certainly the towns will be reflective with the tax bills that have been due on this week for Mount Vernon, so we'll have a better understanding. But that's been a concern from the selectmen as to our overall town budgets and people being able to pay their taxes. So certainly, though, looking at using possibly funds that are already in the budget, or making sure that there's a contained monthly review as opposed to quarterly view of that, the selectmen will be able to give better feedback as to how the town's doing. But those are just 2 points.
Yeah, two good points. Each school is very unique and different. And frankly, Mount Vernon Village School is a little bit better poised to handle a lot of this because of the low class size we already have, and the teams of teachers that already exist. And so, yes, we're investigating the multi-age piece that goes along with that. And then we're really counting on the selectmen to give us the money we need from their budget, Kim, in Mount Vernon. So if you could work on that for us. So, okay. I will go into the Q&A now, hearing no other questions from our, and oh my, there's 34 questions. So I'll start ticking these off. I don't know which order they come in. If bottom, it looks like from the top. Okay. Josh Cooley asked a question at 4:03. Before the presentation. So what would happen if a teacher cannot come into school for health reasons and needs to teach remotely? What happens to their in-person students? Is the other teacher becoming responsible for them? What does sick days look like if we happen to get COVID while working? Great questions. And Josh, that's our purpose here, is to develop redundancy so that people can move between being in person and at home, particularly our staff members. Because remember, someone might test positive and be asymptomatic and be perfectly able to continue working, but just have to do it in a remote environment. And so if we do this well, we're not going to get it perfect, we know that, but if we get it close enough, it should provide that redundancy where you'll be able to do that. And then sick days is something we're going to have to continue to work on. We're going to encourage people to not come to school when they're ill. And so if sick time policies need to be adjusted to encourage people to do that, we'll do that. Have we ruled out AB schedules? So I'm going to say nothing has been ruled out, but I am not a fan of AB schedules. And the reason why is if 70% of our parents want their kids in school, then an AB schedule is going to be a big disappointment for them for that half the time their kid's not in school. And for the 30% who aren't planning to send their kids to school, I don't think they're going to send them on the A or the B day, or the A or the B week. And so I think we've not really accomplished our objective. And I've been watching several other states and school systems that have rolled out their plans already this summer. And the AB plans that have been rolled out have been very unpopular with communities that have received them. So I just don't think they are practical for our community. If we go to like a status orange and we need to think differently about it, and we're like going to be like in an orange for a very long time, then maybe we need to relook at that. But as of right now, our goal is to get most of our kids in the building if possible. How will it work at Sauhegan with some teachers being remote and some live, when certain classes offered only have 1 or 2 teachers who teach that class? Again, that redundancy still has to exist. And so it might mean a limitation in courses offered. And we're working on that. And we're hoping not to have to reduce courses that particularly our seniors need to graduate, et cetera. But that's a real issue for sure. What about preschool? Preschool is not going to work in a remote fashion. I think we feel pretty confident about that. Anna and I have already had that conversation. I don't see any environment where preschool works remotely. It didn't work that well this past spring, being candid. And so preschool will be in person. That might have an alternating schedule for in-person access. So preschool is a very different construct than our other grade levels, but we're still going to have preschool for sure. It looks like we'll be asking for a significant amount of volunteers. How do you plan to encourage, recruit these people? Where are we finding them? So today was my first attempt at starting that conversation with our community. We need people. I'm hoping there are stay-at-home moms and dads. I'm hoping there are people that are healthy, that feel comfortable coming into the school environment, that want to support us in this way. We're going to rely on our community for those people. Amy Facey has volunteered to come in every day, I think, right, Amy? Yeah, Amy and Kim, and who else here? Stephen O'Keefe doesn't work, so he can perhaps help out as well. How would changing modalities by student choice impact instruction in AP classes? Yeah, so that's a great question. So A-Push is a great example of a class. Maybe there's only one section of that. We're going to have to look at if, and I don't know, this is me spitballing, but perhaps there has to be two sections of A-Push, one online and one remote, and one in person, to allow that flexibility. And maybe they're offered at the exact same time of day so that, like, if a student goes back and forth, their schedule is flexible for that. But that's the whole idea, is that there's two teachers, one doing the remote side, one doing the in-person side, to make that possible. Yes, that requires some scheduling acrobatics. It's probably not the right word, but what will the policy be for those students traveling to or from Sohegan and other voc ed classes and other high schools? So for CTE, that's largely going to be based on those CTE providers and their protocols and our own ability to provide them. We're still going to support that. Mike, is that where your head's at right now still, that we'll still be supporting CTE?
Yeah, but we're partners with them, so we have to see what their protocols are. And hey, back to the previous question real quick.
Yeah,
there's a lot of details that need to be worked out around courses and singletons, like AP classes and some of these electives. And it'd be really premature to roll out scenarios, but it's something that we're working on. And it's just going to take a little bit of time to kind of figure out within the structures that we end up going with as a district and a high school to figure out where the needs are. One thing that I can tell you, an emphasis will be put on to seniors. So Adam, I do appreciate you mentioned that. Their time at school is, one calendar year in theory, based on where we're at right now. So just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. A question from one of our teachers: who will be teaching the students who opt to be remote? So some of our teachers will. In a group of teachers, in a team of teachers, there will have to be someone who's committed to the remote portion of that based on the numbers. And so that's something we'll work on within our buildings to make those assignments and to make that work. We're hoping it works pretty naturally. If there's a teacher who really wants to stay home and not come to the in-school, in-person environment, well, then it stands to reason that person will be the remote teacher for that, in that team of teachers. So is there talk about full classrooms being pushed to remote if students or staff in that class test positive during a green or blue status? Great question. So part of our responsibility, and I'm going to be relying on people like Deanna for this, is how we handle when there's positive tests in our school community, because our science and medical group, again, have told us there will be cases, right, Jim? There will be cases. And so what our role will be is to not overreact to that, but to make notice to all the people who are affected, who are in contact with that person, and then to be vigilant about our contact tracing and symptom tracking. So that's a part of a protocol we still need to develop. But in general, the hope would be that we would not put an entire class out unless we absolutely have to, unless there's widespread occurrence there. I'm told that anybody who wants a COVID-19 test can have one right now. So we'll certainly be encouraging people to contact their primary care provider and to get tested as they need to as well. Deanna, does that sound right?
I don't know about the testing. That would be, I'd refer them to their primary care provider.
Right.
But for if there's a case of a positive person in the school, our first line of action would be to contact the Department of Health and Human Services, which we currently do for any communicable disease or reportable disease right now. And we would go with their guidance for the route of action to take with that. So we wouldn't necessarily like close the school unless that's something that the Department of Health and Human Services recommends us to do.
Thank you, Deanna. Deanna, by the way, is an expert in all of these types of topics and just recently got a master's in a lot of this. So we're thankful for Deanna and all of our school nurses. How will those remote learners be grouped? So by grade level and by preference of parent there, I think is the answer to that. How will students be assessed academically at reopening? How will students of different knowledge levels be taught for growth? How will mastery be assessed for students? So those are, the short answer is that's what we do every start of every school year. Is every teacher, that's what they do, is they level set with their students to figure out what they know and what they don't and where they're at. Our teachers don't teach curriculum in a vacuum. They get to know their students and assess them and then move forward. So that will continue to be the case. Can you share more on your considerations for kindergarten and the scenario under consideration that in-person attendance required for K, or skip kindergarten if you feel the risk isn't suitable for your family? Yeah, that's a great question. And we're just thinking through that. We just even had that conversation in more detail today, because we're just trying to imagine a scenario where kindergarten is successful in a remote environment with students who've never even met in person before. We're not sure about that. We're working through that, and there's no decision on that quite yet, but we're working on it. Let's see. Are a sufficient and consistent supply of disinfectants available for purchase for the school? As I understand, these items are still difficult to locate. My understanding is that we have been successful thus far, and have not had any difficulty quite yet. And the state through DHHS has some stockpiles for schools that would be available for us if need be. But I have heard of shortages lately. When I said, remember in our decision matrix, one of those items was resource availability. So if we're unable to get disinfectant, for example, that's going to change our status level for school right there, because we're not going to be able to maintain that safe environment. Does this reopening plan have a deeper plan in regards to busing? No surprise who asked that question, my friend. And so yes, the answer is yes, this affects busing. And part of what we have to do between now and July 30th is work with our bus companies and figure out, do they have the employees available? Do they have the resources available to put this into practice, and what changes does that make to our bus contracts? So that's something we need to certainly work towards and work for. Another one of our teachers, will core classes be created at the start of the year with the same 20-ish students staying together as a cohort all day in preparation for a possible status change to yellow, which would require minimal movement of students? Would this cohort of students also travel to specials together? This would be a shift from our current practice of mixing students up core to core and in specials to break up social dynamics and provide a variety of learning environments. So great question. I don't know the answer specifically, and I'm not going to put Dr. Bernasconi on the spot, but the answer to that question is, yeah, probably. There's going to have to be some compromises to make this work and to limit exposure between groups of students in order for this all to work well and for people to feel comfortable. And so, yes, we are intending to limit the mixing of students whenever possible, because we clearly know, just think about the earlier question, if there's a positive case, it's one thing to notify the other 19-ish students in a classroom. It's much different if it's 80 or 100 if that student's been mixing with others for the past several days. So we are going to make reasonable attempts to limit that exchange of students. And I don't know, the questions either keep on coming or I'm not answering as fast as I think, but it seems like the list keeps growing. There's a question about security. I have concerns about volunteer-based security. What is the outdoor physical security for? And so put simply, for our students to be able to be outside with teachers, our teachers are going to want to feel that they're safe outside from external issues that might arise. And so we're just thinking that perhaps there are some people in our community that could pass a background check and be vetted that would be appropriate people to have on our campuses, helping to make our school folks feel more comfortable and safe. Do the school boards anticipate the use of unreserved funds for the needs mentioned? So great question, Mrs. Gibson. So actually, yes, there were conversations about unassigned fund balances for these particular purposes. And in fact, 2 of our school boards appropriated money for upgrading our HVAC controls in our school buildings in anticipation of this potential need. And I'm no longer a business administrator, so I'm going to defer to someone who is and who's qualified now, because I'm going to consider myself no longer qualified. But the fund balances that we've returned, the unassigned fund balances that we've returned, those can no longer be spent except by potential special meeting. So when I say special meeting and additional resources, it doesn't necessarily mean raising new tax dollars. it might mean having access to funds that we were planning to return this fall to offset taxes to be used for some of these purposes. Can there be a requirement to show a negative test to come back in the building post-exposure? That's a great question. So what's really interesting is that I have what is a constitutional requirement to provide free and appropriate public education, right? What I can't do is make people sign waivers to send their children to school, right? There are some limitations to what we can do when it comes to students and coming to school. And right now, again, it's questionable whether I have the ability to restrict a student or staff member's access to the school, even if they have symptoms, right? Deanna courts might call a parent and say, your kid's got 102 fever, and we want you to come pick them up. The reality is that there really is nothing that compels a parent to keep their child home. We can keep attempting to send them home, and we kind of shame them a little bit. We do a good job with that. There's some guilt that's laid on, but it's dubious whether there's actually any support for that. There is a state statute that provides a potential for me to have that authority, but I'm going to suggest that in this situation that we need to make it a school board policy that gives us the ability to restrict access to the school building. Again, what's really key here is I don't want anyone to think that we're trying to say that students should not have access to a school. They'll still have access to education through the remote system, right? So that's very different than saying you just can't come to school. And yes, the follow-up question from Amy, the answer is yes, that's my opinion, that the remote requirement satisfies FAPE. Temperature checks can obviously not be done at school, although Karen, I might ask you to come be our point person on that. So will parents be required to do this each morning? Can there be an app developed where the parent must complete basic COVID questions and input temperature, et cetera? So great questions. We need to think through that, and that's a policy level decision. And if you look through the yellow status there's something in there where I say, a COVID questionnaire is required for entry into buildings. We want that, frankly. Our faculty wants that. Our teachers want to know that parents have said whether or not their kids are symptomatic or have had a fever lately or been around someone who's tested positive lately. And so we're looking into that. We're hoping that there's some way to ask that question and compel parents to answer it. But there's some questions there. What type of filters are being used? So our HVAC systems right now have filters in them. I'm not sure what those are. I will say that we're investigating other types of filtering systems that can be applied or tacked on or added to existing systems. There's even been talk of different disinfectants. One thing that's used in some HVAC systems in schools, and that I would encourage us to do for any new systems, would be the use of UV light in HVAC systems in line that filters out, that's been shown to reduce viral and bacterial loads moving through air handling systems. There are also, from what I understand, portable machines that are able to do UV light things, not while children or staff are in a room, not constantly or consistently, but on an ad hoc basis as part of the cleaning protocol. We're looking into that. Will substitute teachers have time and opportunity to receive guidance from the SAU to deliver the due education? I'll say that answer is yes. How would the high school students get all of their classes remotely? Will they have to change a selection, for example, engineering? If you could add to that question, I'm not entirely sure I follow, but if you add to that, I'll come back to it. Can there be a survey to parents to indicate how they're going to get their child to school? Yes, that's part of what we're going to ask parents as we get closer is a couple of questions. Are you thinking of sending your child to school? Yes or no? If yes, how are you planning to get them there? By bus or by walking or by car pickup? And third, which start and dismissal time do you prefer? So we'll be getting a sense of that leading up to help us make our decisions here. What determines the color target number in the draft for me to read later? So I'm intently listening to you guys and can't read the draft and listen to it at the same time. Are you thinking for some of the regularly updated surveys to keep this number accurate? So the answer is yes, this number is going to adjust. I also think our relative comfort level with these things will change over time as conditions change. And so number one on that list of determining factors is our meaning my teams, our boards, this task force perhaps, our perception of the relative risk level in our community, right? That's a qualitative measure that can't be measured necessarily by hospitalizations, by mortality, any of those other things. And that's a primary factor in making these determinations. Can we institute an opt-out options on buses? So yes, so we're probably in the past, the way we've handled buses, we've said, here's when the buses come to your neighborhood, show up and we'll pick up your kid. We're not going to be able to do that this year. We're going to have an opt-in, meaning we want bus transportation for my child. And we're going to have to know when you're going to be using bus transportation, because we're going to want to limit the load on those buses. And we're going to need to know that in advance in order to prepare for that. Adam, do you have a percentage split enrollment assumption when you planned? And yes, Steve, I'm relying on the parent data from May, June, and July that puts us at roughly the 70% target as of that time. We're going to put that survey back out, and my guess is that the numbers have shifted a little, but that was the planning assumption we used. That may or may not be accurate, but for better or worse is what we used. Let's see. Is there a cap on how many students can be in a room at one time? And so again, this is a lot of factors here, but if we assume that 70% of kids are coming and we do a staggered start and end time, we think that will give us the opportunity to limit classroom loading somewhat. Some of our classrooms only measure space for about 9 kids. So we don't think that's going to be practical to have only 9 kids in all of our classrooms and still function as a school. So in that case, there might be a requirement for masks in those classrooms, and there's more than 9 students if we're in the yellow status, right? With a split schedule, has there been consideration for how middle school students access arts classes? Yeah, so actually, first of all, I should have mentioned this earlier, but this is a challenge, but this is also an opportunity for us. And we need to recognize that in this upheaval, there's opportunity to do some of the things we've wanted to do for a while. And 2 things come to mind for me, and that's around all of our arts and our world language. That perhaps now we finally have the ability to use and take advantage of this situation to give the time and energy around arts and world language classes that we've wanted to be doing. It's been kind of a back burner thing for a while. So yes, there's been consideration for that. And that's something that we hope our teachers will participate in helping us make the decision around how that works and how those things and how those schedules come together. But that's a pretty key thing for us. And we're hoping that this might even give us the opportunity to do things in a better way than we've done them in the past. Follow-up, what if a teacher selects remote instruction, but they are the only teacher holding that certifications? Yeah, so that's a realistic concern for us. There's not many of those, however. In fact, very few where there's truly no redundancy. For example, I already know that Anna and Kim have already looked at certifications at the elementary level. I know that the high school staff and the middle school staff have already started to look through that and think through that lens, because there is that requirement that teachers teach within their certification. We know we're not going to waive that. We're still going to adhere to that. And so initial first blush, first pass, first look, we don't think this is going to be a deal stopper for us. But as with all of this, we're not 100% sure how it's all going to work. So we're figuring it out as we go a little bit. Will interventionists continue to provide intervention? Our answer to that, I'm looking at Anna, Bethany, Kim, all of us, Mike at the same time can say yes. It might look different and the schedule might be different for that, but that is in general is our hope. But to make all of this work might also mean that some teachers are doing something different than maybe they did in the past. I just want to acknowledge that. All of our lives have changed, all of our jobs have changed, and for some of us as teachers, your job and your assignment might change as well. There's no getting around that, but that's what we're working through, is how to support you in that and how to give you the resources you need to be successful for that. Back to the question before about high school students and classes. In other words, will classes such as engineering or chemistry that are more hands-on classes still be offered remotely? Yeah, great question. Like science lab classes and engineering classes, those are difficult to do in a remote environment. And so there will be some consideration for how we can make that work, because there's going to be some students taking engineering who are not going to feel comfortable coming into the school in the school environment, and we still need to provide that opportunity for them. So we'll do it, but as I said before, the remote model is strong in many ways, but it's not as good in some ways. We just have to acknowledge that. If remote instruction was better, we would have been doing it this whole time. We know it comes with limitations, and you've zeroed in on one of them for sure. I know I'm answering these somewhat quickly, but I'm trying to just get through. Looks to be 7 more, and we'll see if they keep growing. Will you go by the policy with volunteers having to get a background check? Yes. And will they have to wait until those checks come back, them paying the cost, or SAU? So the answer to that is still yes. I've got a pile of them on my desk that have come back for people. And so, yes, we will still adhere to that. What we do is we have a process. I don't want to speak to it publicly, but we have a process that we do to make sure that people are safe during that time in between when they apply for the background check and when they get it back. But the answer is yes. When will students at CW and AMS be notified of their teacher assignment? I'm not sure. We've got several steps down this pathway before we're ready to do that. So before the start of the school year, but it may not be much before, being honest. Same with Sauhegan, Mount Vernon Village School. Fall sports. The answer is we're really hoping. So spring, summer workouts have already started. The NHIAA executive board met yesterday, and I heard an update that they're going to be supporting fall sports happening this fall, subject to local requirements and conditions, what have you. There may be some things that look different because there might be some parts of the state that are less accessible than others because of the crisis. So I'm hopeful for a fall sports season, but I have to admit that I've got some questions. I'm hopeful I get to be on the sideline of our fall sports just like anybody else. But I'm holding my breath on that one because I'm just not sure how it's all going to shake out. But for right now, it looks like the NHIAA is hopeful for fall sports will happen. So question about the requirements for going from one risk level to the other, and maybe I'll just pull up, if I can find it quickly. I'll just share my screen again quickly. So there's sort of a decision-making process here these are in order. This is probably small, so let me make this a little bit larger. So the top is our local determinations, meaning from survey data, from our task force, from understanding from surrounding communities, just our local determination, our local decision about what we think it ought to be. That's number one. But there's other things that inform that. Governmental decrees from the federal, the state, DHHS, et cetera, that make a requirement for us. For example, that is what required us to go to remote learning this past March. We made the decision to close our schools, and then a day later, I think it was, all of the schools were closed. Local data, what the case counts, what the scientific data around us tells us. Resource availability, as I mentioned before, if we run out of PPE or we don't have disinfectant, well, that changes our status level as a result. The parent faculty decisions will, if we only get 1 out of 10 teachers saying they're feeling comfortable coming back to school, well, then that limits what we can do, right? And so that's and conversely with parents, if 90% of our parents decide to keep their kids home for that next segment, that changes our status level in a way. So, and then finally, just the relative quality of our remote experience there. Asking for a friend. Will you be hiring additional permanent teachers at the middle or high school level to help carry the load? So we're not sure. We're hoping that we don't have to hire additional staff to do this because we are mindful of the expense associated with this. We have highly trained educators. Our teachers are the best in the area. There's no one that I want to go into this process with than with our teachers. And I'm not saying that for any other reason besides our decision-making process has been informed by the quality of our teachers and how good they are. And so we'd rather augment and support them with additional resources like volunteers, long-term subs, other people that can do some of the work for them to make their job of instructing more focused. And I kind of think of it like, I'm looking at Katie Kennedy. She's like the equivalent of a brain surgeon, right? I expect her to come into the room like ready to start working on my brain. I don't need her to like prepare the room, deal with the anesthesia, get the site ready, all of that. Like I expect her just to come in and start working on my brain. That's a metaphor for how she is as a teacher, how all of our teachers are as teachers, and we need to support their instruction model with other people. I'm hoping it doesn't mean that we need other professionals around them because getting folks up to speed is not the easiest thing to do right now. 5 questions. I swear they're multiplying. I understand teachers are not expected to teach both remote and in person. How would this work for related service providers? So I think the same would apply. I did qualify that by saying at the same time. So I'm not opposed to the concept of a teacher doing in-person work for the morning and remote work for the afternoon. What I think a teacher should not be expected to do is have a class where they're teaching with a bunch of kids watching via Zoom and a bunch of other kids in front of them in a classroom. I think that's an unfair expectation for our teachers. I don't think it's the same for if Jolene has Spanish 3 in the morning, that's in person, and Spanish 4 in the afternoon, that's remote. I think that is manageable, perhaps. I'm looking for Jolene to smile at me and tell me that I'm right, but who knows? So will you let the public know when the HVAC decisions have been made, especially regarding the filters and use of disinfecting? And so, yeah, Betsy, everything we're doing, I hope, is completely transparent and open to the public. None of these meetings have been behind closed doors. Everything that the administrators have been working on is we've brought forward, and so we'll continue to do that. School board members will be a part of this discussion, and so you can see either through board meetings or through whatever what we're doing. Also, if staff members have specific questions about protocols, I think it's probably appropriate for Roger Preston, our new facilities director, to publish sort of a document. How are we cleaning? How are we changing filters? What's the schedule? What does that look like? Because I would want to know that if I was working in a particular classroom. So we will. Will the New Hampshire DOE be flexible this year with hours of instruction? I believe the answer to be yes. Every indication has been yes so far. The administrative rule that allows for remote instruction was permanently changed back in April. That enables us to do this remote instructing, and so I believe that will continue. And yes, I believe they'll remain flexible with us. Music and theater, wait and see, or only during certain color levels. So for the most part, I think music and theater should be able to continue. Performances might look different, right? And so I just don't know the answer to that quite yet. I hope to see, I'm looking forward to seeing what I understand there might be a performance this summer for a spring musical that was delayed, I'm going to call it, but I don't want to get ahead of other people announcing that quite yet. And they're making some unique protocols to make that happen safely. So we definitely need to continue to support our kids that are connected to music and theater. Hope to do that. Man, that's a lot of good questions, but we're right to about 3 minutes before our typical end time. From the committee task force, I'll give you guys one last chance to jump in. Otherwise, I'm hopeful to call it.
Just Adam, real fast, next steps, where the asks are to go back to the committee level, discuss the presentation tonight, solicit feedback, and provide it to you in written form before next Thursday. Is that the game plan?
No, so really the game plan is between now and next Thursday, I want the folks that you guys as the task force to digest this. I really need you folks to tell me what are the big missing things, what are the big misses, what have we not gotten right, what have we gotten right, what else needs to be further defined, articulated, all of that. So I'm really asking you folks as task force members to do that between now and next week. And then for you guys to provide that feedback to me at our next meeting next Thursday. And then from next Thursday to the following Thursday on the 23rd to meet with your subgroups during that period of time. I think you guys deserve the benefit of having a chance to digest this before giving me feedback. And there's no point in going to subgroups if you guys provide feedback that changes our plan before we go to our subgroups and solicit their feedback. So that's all the ask of you folks is to go through this, think about it from several perspectives and tell me what you think.
Adam, there were a couple items in the chat also that maybe you want to look at some point.
Oh gosh,
and respond to.
I was blissfully ignorant of what was going on in the chat. So, okay, I'll try to answer some of these very quickly. Question about Mount Vernon, what happens with only 2 teachers at grade levels if one wants to stay home and one in school? So that's something we're gonna have to work out for sure. Kim's on that. Welcome to Mount Vernon, Kim. Solve this riddle for us. Do you have any idea what the school day hours would be? So with the staggered schedule, our hope is, again, this is like a logistical a rabbit to pull out of a hat. Our hope is that one schedule will be the typical schedule for the school, that similar, if not exactly, to what it was last year. And then the other schedule either before or after that for that particular school. We've got to make it work with buses, with teachers, there's a whole lot there. Someone says, thank you for the well thought out plan. Yeah, no problem. Appreciate things, thank you. Can students do VLAX if their AP class is not being offered? Certainly we're going to support VLAX for our high school kids, even our middle school kids when possible. We have to make use of that resource for sure. More of my consideration for kindergarten, I think I got that one. Can our system handle a major influx of kindergarten students in 2021 if they hold off for a year? That's a great question. We're going to have to, and we'll adjust for that if need be. But again, that's something we're still working through. Some of you have answered some of these, it looks like. Autumn says, let us know how the Mount Vernon PTA can help volunteer recruitment. Absolutely. Our PTAs are going to be our first line of recruitment for all of that. How do I socially distance 20 first graders? Yeah, I don't see that happening, and that's what I mean. I'm hoping that, Amanda, you have roughly 70% of that in the physical classroom, which helps a little bit. And then if you cannot, that you do your best in that environment, and you can certainly wear a mask. Teachers can certainly do whatever they need to do on the PPE side of things. And we'll make that work the best we possibly can. Let's see. Do we have a plan for support staff, office staff, paraprofessionals? We do, actually. We've been working on that already, and how our support staff, our buildings can't run without our paraprofessionals and our office staff and our custodians, our food service folks. They just can't. And so those folks are critical to the process. They'll have the same availability and opportunity, we hope, to be either remote or in person. And we've already started to shake this out a little bit with how that might look for our support staff. So we need you folks for sure. Okay, is that all? Let's see. Nope. Given your reply, are you expecting remote teachers to teach more students than their in-person counterparts? Otherwise, how can the in-person teacher only have 70%? So yeah, again, teams of teachers, 30% from 2 or 3 classes probably equals a full class, right? Something like that. So it's going to be, I'm just thinking about remote first grade. That's really hard to do. We know that we know that's really difficult to do, especially because our first graders this year had 3 months where they were home last year and they didn't get their full kindergarten experience. And some first graders are new to school and don't go to kindergarten before they show up. So not easy, not easy. We're going, I can't reiterate enough that this is a numbers thing, that we are going in faith that this is going to work out, and there's going to be some areas where it's imperfect and we're going to have to adjust because of how it's imperfect. We don't know, there's going to be imperfections in how first grade families decide remote versus in person and how that matches up to our teaching staff. And we know that we're going to have to do what we can to adjust to that situation. But again, if we go back to our foundations that we're all in this together and that we all have to figure it out together and be accountable and be responsible, I just have confidence it's going to work out. But I know this. I know our teachers and I know our administrators and our support staff. They are selfless people who put their students in front of themselves sometimes. And part of our goal is to make our staff feel comfortable and safe in coming back to school, and frankly stop them from doing some of that sacrifice and find the right balance there for that. But I'd really love to be done talking at this point. Is that, can we call it? All right. Thank you all for participating. This will be posted online along with the materials. Have a great day, great weekend. Talk to you all next week.
Thank you.